Your voice is so sexy. Recording in progress.
That's like
That's one thing
GPS.
Zoom got right. That lady.
Yeah. And here we
GPS
are. We're
Puerto
live.
Rico.
All right. Well, welcome. We're live. Woohoo! We're still mastering the live of YouTube, but we are live and it's working, right, Janet? It's working. She's giving me the nod. Good. All right. So welcome to Reflect, Recalibrate. Woohoo! We are your two lovely lady artivist hosts, Janet E. Dandridge and myself, Danny Snyder. This is our final episode of the Design Advocacy Collection. So don't worry, not our final episode. We've got lots more good stuff coming in the new year. But for this collection, our Design Advocacy Collection, we have been inviting some different people to our episodes. Particularly today, we're inviting some of our RFC comrades to join our discussion. In this three-part collection series, in the first part, it was just Janet and I discussing what is design advocacy, what we thought it is, raising some questions. And then in the second episode, we brought in the amazing Greg Bumbury and pulled from his brain all these juicy definitions for design advocacy. Some that maybe we agreed with, some maybe we didn't disagree with. We might chat about that today. What is a design advocacy? Is that a word?
Advocate?
Advocate. There we go. Words. I kept wanting to say artivist. I really kept wanting to say artivist. Or a design activist. What are these different things? So these are some things we discussed with him. And then today, what's really cool is, again, we're bringing in some of our RFC comrades in to discuss further, to reflect further on these first two episodes. What were some aha moments for us? What were some maybe think moments for us? So I want to welcome our two guests today. Woohoo! We have the Michel F. Brava. Michel is a director, puppeteer, writer, filmmaker, and producer with a background in improvisational comedy, a love of storytelling, and a bone-deep commitment to conservation and sustainability, which I really love. Finger applause. That's what I tell my students. Give me a little finger applause. And then welcome Amy Funderburk. Amy is a visionary visual artist who explores the intersection of the physical realm with the fluid spiritual and emotional realms, creating participatory and transformative experiences for her audiences. And the transformation part is the part that really excites me. So finger applause for Amy. All right, so thank you all for coming. We super appreciate y'all giving us your time and your reflections and maybe some recalibrations. I don't know.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so Janet, shall we jump into it?
Yeah, let's go ahead. What's that first question for this study group here?
Well, like I said before, we were going to think about aha moments and moments. My first question is just, was anything really surprising to you or raised your curiosity when you were listening to these first two episodes about design advocacy? I don't know if someone wants to go first. Michel, Amy. How about Michel?
Okay, yeah, I can go. I really enjoyed a lot of Greg's sort of talk and his perspective on things. Danny, I think you said like, I wish you were my professor. And I was definitely sitting there going like, me too. Nothing against any of my professors, but the way that he sort of looked at things, I felt like was very accurate to my experience working in like corporate America in a way that I was never prepared for getting my like degree in theater. Like I learned how to audition and I learned how to present myself well and I learned how to do all the things you have to do to be a professional actor. None of that sort of did business with the idea of like, well, you're going to go out in the world and you're making art not for the sake of art or the sake of expression, but you're making art for the sake of a paycheck, working for a company and that kind of thing. And so it was like on the nose to an extent where I was like, wow, it's like he's reading my journals or something. So it was also nice to hear that because it's like I felt like a little bit less alone in that. I haven't heard a lot of people articulate those things in as succinct a way as he did. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, he's super succinct. If there's anything I took away from that was like, if I could talk like Greg, that would be awesome.
I love it. I love it. I'm like, wow.
It's so articulate. I was like, did you write all this out and you were just reading it during the podcast? I was like, and here I am, the podcast host. Like, these are some skills I really admire. I could listen to him all day. In fact, he's got some really great TED Talks. Really encourage our listeners to go just Google him and find all these videos and just listen to him all day. And oh, he did used to have his own podcast too. I don't know what the update is on that, but he has been using past tense verbs to describe the podcast. Maybe one day he'll bring it back. That'd be awesome. But yeah, Amy, what made you think?
One thing that that Greg to me was he was more delineating between fine art and advertising, and he did mention that there is a gray area. I really want to illuminate that gray area today because okay, Pablo Picasso's super problematic because I think we all know at this point how abusive he was to all of his partners. It was like, ugh. But everybody keeps wanting us to kind of compartmentalize that and separate that from the genius of the painter. So I'll go with that for the time being. But in response to his ginormous painting Guernica, which he painted in 1937, it's an oil painting that's primarily monochromatic, and he used a lot of symbols just to spotlight the Spanish Civil War and the bombing of this town, Guernica. And I always think of it as, to summarize his quote, that art's not supposed to match the sofa, it's a weapon of war. But the actual quote is a little longer than that. Painting is not made to decorate apartments. It's an offensive and defensive weapon against the enemy. And I think that's such a powerful statement, the power of the visual image. And there's a lot of people, like I was so glad, Danny, in the first iteration of this series that you mentioned the Guerrilla Girls, because as I was listening, I was like, Guerrilla Girls, Guerrilla Girls. They started in the 80s, I think mid 80s. I made notes. 85. You can't get more mid 80s than that. And they're anonymous. Like they wear these gorilla masks and they're called Frida Kahlo and George O'Keeffe. And, they go by all these different names and we never know who, like contemporary artists, who they are. And they use disruptive headlines and outrageous visuals and statistics to get their point across. I think it was a billboard that Danny, you mentioned. It was, the nude woman there from the back reclining in this odalisque pose with her gorilla mask on, which that's funny, right? So they grab you from humor. And I believe that's from Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe, which was very, at Manet's time, was very shocking to people. Here with these nude women having a picnic with fully clothed men. It's like, oh yeah, that's completely normal. In this public park. And so the poster, or the billboard rather, is that, do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? And it was the statistics. The first one in 1989 was, these are sobering statistics, everybody. Less than 5% of the artists in the modern art sections are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. And they've gone back and they've redone the statistics a couple of times. In 2005, it was less than 3% of artists were women, but 83% of the nudes were female. And then by 2012, less than 4% of the artists, so we're not seeing a big shift, you guys. But 76% of the nudes were female. So we're getting more naked men, apparently, but not really more women artists. So, there you go. But there has been a movement over the last several years to have more women and diversity in general, and women of a certain age. I think Yayoi Kusama's popularity has really helped maybe with that, because she provides an experience, an Instagrammable experience, and I think that has helped to move that along. So it's like a glacial pace, but it is getting better. It is getting better, and I think the Guerrilla Girls and movements like that can only help.
I was just gonna say real quick, it's so interesting when you said like painting is not meant to decorate your apartment walls. And then here is Michael, who just got a new job. Michael, do you want to elaborate on what your new job is? And I'm curious what your opinion is of that quote from Picasso.
Yeah, so I'm working as the marketing director for Riverviews Artspace, which is a gallery in downtown Lynchburg, and it's actually a old converted shoe factory, if you can believe that. And there's actually like artist lofts that are, used as artist studios that are part of our organization. Then we also have a couple of gallery spaces, and we do, shows of contemporary art. I am like so overjoyed to be working there. It's been a really cool experience for me, sort of coming from, after school, I did a lot of corporate America type stuff, in marketing and filmmaking and that kind of thing. And now being back in the arts, which is, what I studied in school. And my favorite thing about it is sort of getting to talk to these contemporary artists who are, telling the stories of today and telling the stories of their personal experience through their art. And like, it's gotta be hard. I mean, I'm an artist as well. I'm not a visual artist, I'm a filmmaker, so it's a little bit different, but like, I can't even imagine the difficulty of sort of trying to reach kind of a level of personal expression, given all the information that you have, like sort of in front of you, and just like, how do you condense that, if that's the job of the artist, to like sort of reflect their time? What a time to be reflecting. Good night. And so I'm incredibly impressed and sort of challenged by these people who get in there, and they're kind of on the front lines of a lot of that for some of them. And then there's others who are who have, the amount of tools that are in front of them are also really sort of a different kind of thing. Is that there's never been more tools to make art than there are right now, because there's technology and there's sort of this whole thing. And I think that the artist today, the contemporary artist, also has to kind of almost do business with social media in a sense, because like everybody has a brand, right? Everybody's got some sort of digital presence that exists on the internet and isn't real, except it's kind of is more real than you are right now. And like, everybody's telling a story. And so if everybody is telling a story, is no one telling a story, or is everybody telling a story? And it's that that weird dichotomy is something that they have to kind of work through, and I don't envy them. And in fact, my job is to go, hey, are you guys doing good at that? Let me take pictures of it, because that's ultimately, how we work together. So yeah, it's been interesting.
What you're talking about, Michael, I'm relating to the design in everything that Greg brought up, that Danny and I also mentioned in the part 1 of this Design Advocacy Collection. And because you have that design in everything, the design of how we, quote, must utilize social media to promote our work and to get into the spaces in which we can have, financial success, we can have the acclaim that people, want, some people want. But we have to consider how that design can adversely impact all the other arenas within our lives. People who are constantly on social media because what they believe is that's the only route to being able to thrive within our society, right? So when Greg talked about that delineation between the arts and design, what he said was design is for users and art is about the artist. He also said that with design advocacy is promoting the value of the design and using design methodologies to influence a service or to a cause or for an idea. So in breaking that down, design, influence, and persuasion within the system, and then going into activism. Activism is direct action. So when you're doing the design, right, when you're designing, how are you going to create your career? How are you going to create your work? What influences you and how are you going to select? You're thinking about all of that, especially as an artist, right? You're thinking about, okay, how is this going to influence and persuade the entities and the people that I need to persuade to, let's say, impact this campaign for reproductive rights? And then how am I going to do that directly? We utilize our medium, right? We all have different media that we use, right? So if we are using painting or, puppeteering or music or, photography, how is that going to impact that direct action? how is that going to impact our careers so that we can have that balance between the design of our careers being successful and designing our lifestyles to be, healthy, as well as balancing the whole thing about how are we going to impact social change?
I don't
That
know
was
if Amy, I was going to say, pass the mic to you because I could tell
you could tell
I could tell the squirrel or the rabbit or your gerbil in your brain was spinning. So go for it.
That was the line that I'm glad that you quoted Greg there, Janet, because that was the line that made me go, when he said, say it again about that the art was about the artist.
So design is about users,
design.
and art is about the artist.
Right. So jumping to your comments about social media, as a visual artist, the message that I keep getting, authenticity, your audience wants authenticity. And, that makes me wonder, how authentic is everybody really on social media? Because I know for myself, there's certainly a certain vibe or persona or whatever that I want people to perceive me as, but of course we can't control what other people think, obviously. But, there's only so much authenticity that you probably want to show. you know that being said, I think there's kind of a continuum because in its purest form, like design as in graphic design for a client, that's going to certainly be about the client. And then fine art on the other end of the stick is about your authentic experience that might speak in a universal arena to others. But in my gray area thing, there's a couple of artists that I wanted to spotlight. Barbara Kruger, you mentioned reproductive rights. She's been a real voice for that over the years. She had a background in advertising magazines. She uses mass communication and advertising to explore gender and identity. She was a magazine editorial designer. So she appropriates and alters existing images. And the piece that I was most familiar with is Savoir c'est pouvoir, which means knowledge is power. And it's a 1989 lithograph with text art. It's if the model identifies as a woman, but a female-looking face that's divided in half. One's the positive images and one is the negative image, where the values are reversed. And it's black, white, and red, which, kind of like Picasso's Guernica being mostly black and white. Black, white, and red is such a powerful, arresting color scheme, right? And then an artist who, when I interviewed Danny a few years ago for Art and Object piece on artivism, let's get that in the show notes. But another artist who I interviewed is Peggy Diggs, who's in New Mexico. And since 2007, she's been exploring racism. She's white. And she often uses the form of distributed multiples like business cards and junk mail. She's done billboards and that sort of thing, kind of like the Guerrilla Girls in that sense. So she's done printed pieces that say things like, how did you discover your beliefs about race? And do people fear you because of your race? And she's gone around and interviewed other white individuals about their whiteness. And so that, I think, is an example of someone who's speaking from her experience, but is kind of flipping the script in a way to, she's like asking the tough questions about white privilege to other white individuals. And she's had the courage and self-awareness to look at her own stuff along those lines, to help facilitate a conversation for change. So those are examples of using like these more graphic design elements like business cards, billboards, yard signs, that sort of thing, but using them in a fine art way, which I think is a really interesting space to inhabit. It's a really interesting gray area, I think.
I think that also, I know, Janet, I could tell you have an idea too, but I was thinking about the measurability part that you had mentioned in the interview with Greg about with artivists, we really, I mean, we are supposed to, I guess we should think about the measurability part, what we want that direct action to be, like what is our direct action and what is the change in behavior that we want to see in our spectators and our viewers, right? What is now the tools that we're going to provide them with to see them on their way to go enact change themselves, right? And then how do we track that is really difficult. And we've talked about that in a couple of different episodes of like, can you even track it? And so much of it might be such a, what we would consider a small action versus like a really, really big action, like showing up at a protest, right? So I'm curious, like with those artists that you mentioned, Amy, if there was like a specific goal that was very clearly articulated, maybe even like in your interviews with her, because that was the other thing that like that Greg was delineating was that there's the artists who are not supposed to really talk about their art and just let the art speak for itself, right? And then there's those artivists who want this direct action, and so we speak more about the art, what our intention is and what we're trying to do to change society, right? So, and I think there's like a lot of gray area with that too. I don't think that's a very clear. There's a lot of artists too. For example, I think about this every time I go to an open mic when a musician has to explain what the song is about before they play the song. And I'm like, just sing the song, dude. Just sing it. you don't need to give the synopsis for your own lyrics, right? So, but yeah, I'm just curious, like if these artists expressed any of that to you.
Well, fortunately, I thought I might need to refer to this article, so I pulled it up. Because obviously, I can't speak for her other than I can quote her from the piece. Peggy Diggs said, I think attitudes, oh, sorry. She said, I don't tend to think that any one person can change anyone's beliefs, much less behavior. I think attitudes can be cumulatively nudged towards justice if people are presented with multiple renditions of thinking not like their own. And that actually feeds me into the Guerrilla Girls motto, which I went to their website last night. The Guerrilla Girls say that their motto is, do one thing, if it works, do another. If it doesn't, do another anyway, keep chipping away. So it's the idea of just, keep at it, keep pounding, because you're going to maybe reach one person one way and other people other ways. Just like there's different people learn in different ways through repetition, through doing, through lecture, there's different ways of learning. So maybe it's the same sort of idea that, you just keep chipping away at it. Another piece I really wanted to spotlight that Peggy did was about intimate partner violence. She did a piece with milk cartons, and the hardest part was getting a dairy who was willing to do it. But the idea was, maybe it's usually stereotypically women who are going to the grocery store. To reach those individuals, I want to do like, with the lost children on the milk cartons, but this was like awareness about domestic violence. And so there was like this menacing, shadowy hand like this, on the cartons. And the text read something like, how often does an argument get out of hand? That sort of thing. And in fact, she found a dairy to do it, and then they got cold feet, I guess, and they pulled out. And so there was a campaign to get the dairy to, yes, you need to go through with this. This is a really important idea. And then they did, and they printed it and actually sold the piece in the stores. And so I don't know if there's a way, maybe there is, to measure something like that, where you're trying to reach individuals where they shop. It's like any kind of public art, because you're meeting people where they are instead of expecting them to go into a museum to see a piece of fine art or expecting them to go into a gallery, when a lot of people might assume you have to have a lot of money to go into a gallery. So she was really meeting people where they are. And so can you measure something like that? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Michael, I'm curious about your thoughts on that measurability, especially as in, being an artist, as well as now being, a marketing director at an art gallery, art space.
Yeah, so I'm also going to talk a little bit just about so measurability in corporate America is the thing, right? That's and being somebody who worked in marketing, that was always the thing. How many likes are we getting? How many people are we engaging with? How many? And what I will say about this that I find kind of fascinating is that there's an assumption that if something is measurable, that we can create some kind of conclusion from that measurability, right? This many likes means that people are interested in our product, maybe. Or maybe it's just happening. Like maybe people are just liking this today. Maybe we've touched on and this is like, I think is kind of interesting, is maybe we've touched on something that unintentional that is causing a response that is not necessarily like we're measuring all the likes on this post, but why is that response actually happening? Is it happening because of the things we decided that we wanted to, what's the story that we wanted to tell? Or is it that people are responding to something else about this, you know? And so like, for instance, if you're working with, you know, if you're in marketing and you're working with some kind of celebrity, like a spokesperson or that kind of thing, maybe people just like that person. You know, I've done some spokesperson-y type work before where it's just like, you know, we're working on a project and we need somebody to do a voiceover. I've done that before. Here's a voiceover. You know, if we get a bunch of likes on that, maybe that's just people who like my voice. Doesn't mean we're going to make sales. And so, yeah, I think that in particular, social media has put a huge, like, sort of spin on this, on this idea of how you can measure impact and how you can't measure impact. And there's a lot of math around it. And I also think that as we move towards this future where there's this AI thing, and we move towards this future where everybody's got a brand, and I really believe that that's something that like our like, you know, I'm a millennial, the Gen Zers, and then whatever we call the generation after them, they all have like a personal perspective and an audience. And so what does that like mean for those of us who are, you know, trying to enact change when your competition is people with cat videos? The cat videos, do they enact change? I mean, I enjoy them. I spend an enormous amount of time watching cat videos. I think cats are amazing. Does it cause any sort of action in me? No. And so the like the measurability of the popularity of a cat video doesn't actually indicate anything. Or at least I would argue that that doesn't. I mean, it indicates that we like cats, but like, of course we do. They're cool. So yeah, I also think that there's this weird, and I don't have an answer to this. It's sort of just a question. There's something about this infinite scroll that exists on most social media that changes at least how I think about how people are responding to something. Because if you're sort of thinking about it, I mean, obviously there's videos involved, but most of the time, most social media, you're looking at pictures. You're looking at a very short temporal experience. But that temporal experience is being altered by the fact that how long have you been scrolling? And like the fact that you can scroll forever. When you're reading a newspaper, that's not what happens. You get to the end of the page and you decide to turn the page. You make a decision at the end of sort of consuming some of that. And if there's no end to that consumption, what does that mean to your attention? What does that mean to, once again, like capturing and measuring something? Because there's this whole other element that doesn't have anything to do with really anything that we can measure. We can't go, this person's been scrolling social media for 5 minutes and therefore they are responding in this way to this advertisement. Or, you know, maybe there is somebody who can sort of pull those numbers, but that's a scary thing to sort of be able to recognize. So yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's yeah.
You're just making me think about how Greg brought up, it was a through line in part 2, active listening, because artists play the role, graphic designers play the role, creatives play the role oftentimes of the active listener. Because as he was talking about in graphic design, you know, you are like a therapist, a preacher, an artist simultaneously, because you need to listen to your client, right? To be able to produce what the client needs. And as an artist, you are listening to yourself. You have to actively listen to yourself because you're working with what I call the personal empirical, the empirical data that recounts what has happened to you. Like these are facts that have happened to you and how that influences your output, how you create the process of it. And Michael, that infinite scroll, what I wrote down was the vastness of that impacts the retention, impacts that active listening. So when we think about likes and the relationship to what Amy brought up, authenticity, it's like this cluster, you know what, of how do I actually utilize all these things to the advantage of myself, and if I want to impact social change to the advantage of others, without being lost within this quote authenticity that's measured through likes, which isn't, it's just not real. It's just not real. So you have to be an active listener, listening to yourself, right? Listening to the people, the client, etc., to be able to have that authenticity. It's like, why do we have to even say be authentic? Why can't you just be authentic? Who told you you can't be? Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe it's the society that we've lived in, and how now social media is like, no, you have to be all these other things. Something on a sidebar note of that, I remember one year when I was visiting France for some art stuff, I saw a billboard and it was definitely like airbrushed. And it was a little note at the bottom or something that said, this image is airbrushed. This is not reality. It was something like that. I'm paraphrasing totally, but they told you so that that little kid that looks at it won't think that this is how I'm supposed to look. They can be their authentic selves.
I've been having a little issues with the word authenticity lately, because I feel like when someone's like, oh, be authentic, I'm like, what you're really telling me is to be unique so that I stand out, so that I get more likes, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm starting to have some issues with this term. And I'll be honest, when listening back to these two episodes, I was thinking like, maybe I'm obsessing too much sometimes about certain definitions of words. I'm curious too how words will change over time as well, how we'll use these words, like even 10 years from now. So, in fact, Amy and I, the last phone call we had, we were talking about the word retarded, for example, and like how that word is horribly used, but how it's also used in comedy, and how like the definition of it is changing. So the use of it is changing. So, yeah, I don't know, like the authenticity thing. I don't know about that one. And then with AI, I'm like, oh, I don't know about that one. Which is funny that y'all brought up AI and that Greg brought up AI, because if I can give a little teaser, our next collection is going to be going into that. We're not going to say today what the name of that collection is, but we are going to be getting into that in the new year for sure. Amy, can I pass the mic on to you? I'm curious what some of your thoughts are on all this.
I think Michael has something to say.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Quick.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, very, very quickly. I think that there's something, once again, questions, not answers. What does it mean to be like an influencer, right? Because we look at that and we go, if you're an influencer, you're authentic. You take your personal brand and you stand for X, Y, and Z. But then all of that is also a manipulation, a creation, inherently, it is almost an artistic act of you're recreating something and telling the story of yourself in a way that causes people to like want to buy products or do whatever it is that you do with influencers. I don't entirely follow all of the reason why people love influencers, but there we are. And so I think that like, I've heard statistics, which I won't like quote, that a lot of younger people are very interested in becoming influencers. And so what does that mean? Because you're sort of telling the story like, well, you should be authentic, but also you need to hit these markers in order to be successful. Because like if you're authentic and you have no likes, then nobody cares. You know, and so I find that the sort of the term of an influencer to be just like kind of fascinating, because it wasn't a thing that existed 10 years ago, at least in my recollection. That wasn't like a job title that you could like, oh, I'm an influencer and I deal with all these brands. That just wasn't a thing, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But now it's very, very much a thing, and it's not a small amount of money is going towards the sort of promotion and utilization of influencers. And there's children influencers. There's kids who like open toys for a living. Like that's a very real thing. They make money. They make real money doing that. And so what does that mean about the authenticity of their childhood? It's I don't want to paint a bleak picture, but it shows a growth that I think is not necessarily, in my opinion, like a positive direction for us to move as a society.
Yeah. And as a teacher of many young little children, and when you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they're like, I want to be either an influencer or a YouTuber. It's like, oh,
no.
yeah. But I will say we do need to go to our takeaway questions soon. But before we do, the reason why I wanted to pass the mic on to you, Amy, was because, as you know, I've written many letters of recommendation for you with different grant applications. And I always say that you're one of the most vulnerable and authentic artists that I've ever worked with. And so
thank you.
I was wondering what your thoughts were on all of this.
Because you were reading my mind. You knew I had thoughts, and you probably also saw me roll my eyes when the AI came up.
Yeah.
Because talk about being not authentic. It's a robot, right? It's a computer or whatever. Read some Asimov, people. Don't go down that road. It's a bad choice. But anyway, one thing I wanted to mention briefly to what Michael said about the divine scroll, the infinite scroll. The power of the image. When I first joined Twitter, when it was Twitter before Emperor Palpatine took over, now I'm on Blue Sky. I wonder why. But anyway, one of the things that I was taught, about percentages was that if you include an image with your tweet, I think it was 85% more engagement. So that speaks to the power of the visual image. Someone's going to see an image and react to it faster than whether or not they would sit down and listen to you talk on a soapbox or read something that you'd written. The image is going to just grab you, right? I had written down that I get direct feedback when I do participatory pieces, which is like what Danny was alluding to here. A piece that I did called Excavations, where it was hidden emotions. So it was personal to me, but what I like is to inhabit is the space where something that's super authentic to me also becomes universal, right? So a lot of people can probably relate to discovering hidden emotions about trauma or whatever. And so there were identical, like toxic positivity is what I was going for here, identical happy face self-portraits printed on curtains. And people raised each identical happy face curtain, which was monochromatic. And by the way, I also made that look as perfect as I could in Photoshop, but then it got printed on kind of a velvety fabric, and so there were imperfections in the fabric, and I tacked the images on where they kind of slumped a little bit, and they were hand tacked and not perfectly sewn, so it was like there's no such thing as perfect or the perfect image. And so you raised the curtain and it revealed the different hidden emotions. And anybody who's known me for very long knows that I would never show up to an art reception with no makeup on, for example, right? But I had no makeup on for these emotions, and when I was actually feeling each emotion is when I took the reference photographs. So it was as, if you will, authentic as I could be, right? And then I had people take little stones, and after they'd seen all the emotions, imagine the weight of a heavy emotion they wanted to put down and put it underneath the corresponding painting. And so these little cairns of stones built up over the course of the exhibit when this was first debuted. Which emotion, you don't know all the emotions that I put in, but of 8 emotions, 5 were on display here. Which one do you think got the most number of stones? I won't make you sweat it out for long. I'll tell you. Any guesses? Danny may know. I may have told you.
I don't think I actually know, but I'm gonna bet it was anger. I don't know. What was it?
It was actually fear. And they say that anger is what they call a secondary, they being therapists, right? Anger is a secondary emotion, and the primary emotion under anger, like, why are you angry? Because you're afraid, right? And so that's one of the things that I look at now. It's like all these angry people, right? It's like, well, what are you guys actually afraid of? Why are you afraid of diversity, or why are you afraid of whatever, of intelligence, or, they tried to make woke be a bad word instead of what I feel is a very positive word. Because we all should be awake. We all should be, talk about authenticity, be awake and inhabiting the world, and but anyway. So what are you afraid of?
Well, real quick, I want to talk about that woke thing, because woke was appropriated from Black culture. In Black culture, woke meant you recognize what is going on, therefore you're going to do something about it. So now that it's been appropriated by people who are utilizing it in a negative way, and they're making it out to be something that's like, oh, well, what does that mean? That means nothing. Taking away the value of what it means within Black culture is the problem for me. What it actually signifies for people who are consistently oppressed within the United States. And this word being able to unify us and help others understand, that's what it is. And I just want to make sure, like, our listeners understand that. Amy made the point, but I just want to emphasize why woke actually is a significant word within the culture and how it has been appropriated and used negatively.
Thank you for elaborating on that. Absolutely. And I support everything you just said.
Can I even just add a little bit to that? I remember, it's not like, I feel like it's sort of not only appropriated, but also like going like, oh, all this new woke whatever. And I remember people calling people woke like when I was in high school. Like, this has existed for a long time, and it's like hitting people's consciousness and perhaps even for the first time for them, and then that's like, then they're having a reaction to it. But like, not only is this part of our culture, it's been part of our culture for a long time.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to talk more on that, but I do know Janet gave me the signal that it's time to get to our takeaway question. Should I go on, Janet? Is that cool?
Yes, please.
So, because I could have conversations all day just about words, definitions. I can get stupid academic sometimes. Does that make sense? Stupid academic. But and I'm trying to not obsess too much about terms. But I do think it's, for me personally, helpful as far as figuring out who I am and how to focus all of these things that I want to do right in life. How can I try to focus it in on this one umbrella concept? The same way as a theater director, when I'm directing a show, I have this one concept that everything fits into. But yeah, so takeaways. Our concluding question for our podcast episode today is, what was your biggest takeaway from this collection, from the Design Advocacy Collection? Does anyone want to go first?
How about you, Danny?
Me? Oh,
yes.
Honestly, I wasn't really sure how to answer this question because I knew we were going to ask this question. And I was thinking about it a lot this morning and last night, of the biggest takeaway, because there was a lot of things that I resonated with, but particularly when he was talking about balancing the corporate jobs with the projects that are either that we're the authors of or that we're doing in support of like a campaign or maybe even a nonprofit, balancing this work. And especially for me, I live in an area now in Lynchburg, Virginia, as does Michael. And here I have really struggled to find work. And I feel I'm too much of a punk now. Like, when I was in my 20s, I was like, yes, because I had this fear of like, I had to say yes, I had to make money. And, and now I'm like, for example, right now I'm working for an organization where I'm kind of like, I don't really know if I agree with this, but I really need that paycheck and that health insurance because I'm getting older and I'm having new problems. So it's like when he was talking about balancing these choices, and that the worst place that you could be in as an artist is having to say yes to something that you, especially ethically, you don't align with. And so, and I live in an area where I ethically don't align with a lot of things. So it's been interesting trying to figure out that balance. And there's lots of nights of tears and frustration and not having the answers. And when he was like, oh, this is just our life, we just are going to be constantly navigating this, I was like, That's really not helpful for me right now when I'm panicking about what the heck I'm doing with my life. But I did like that he said, this is just part of our job, is we're going to constantly be navigating these relationships and this balance. And I'm trying to accept that that is just going to be, it's going to be like that for forever. But if I can get back into that position, part of the problem is I move too much. I go to Germany, I go to Mexico, I go to California. And so I'm always having to restart over and over and over again with building up clientele and putting my work out there. But I'm hoping here in a place that's very conservative and where there's not a lot of art happening, in my opinion, there's still some things happening, but not a lot, in my opinion. I hope I can get to that point where people will be coming to me. You know, it's not just me always going to people. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Could I hop in next?
Oh, please.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just because I have some similar thoughts. Yeah, my takeaway from Greg's talk that I actually wrote down here is he said the dissonance of letting things slide causes unresolved anger, and I'm paraphrasing slightly. And that just like, whew, in my soul, I felt that when he said that, because I think that as artists, oftentimes it's harder for us to let things slide, and I don't know why exactly. But, you know, working in a corporation, working in a very large organization of any sort, there's margins and there's people on the margins, and that always happens. And when you're on the margins, it's like you kind of you deal with a certain amount of abuse on a regular basis. And I think that this happens. That's like a human thing. It's not necessarily like, oh, corporations are evil. It's when you get large groups of people, somebody's on the outside, and the people on the outside, they're not on the inside. So they're shivering. And but his saying that like that causes unresolved anger kind of it felt like for me like it's almost permission to like I haven't thought about it that way of like, oh, I've got an enormous amount of unresolved anger, most likely, but I've never called it that before. I've never really sort of dealt with it in that way. And then once again, painting and going like, oh yeah, and you know, actually that unresolved anger, you kind of got to figure out how to deal with it because it's not going to go away. And I hadn't heard anybody say all of those things in like that particular stack or like I've eaten pieces of that, but I've never had it as a sandwich. And I really love that Greg like said it in a way where he put it together as a sandwich and went, hey, you got to eat that now. But yeah, I really appreciated that.
And I would call that unresolved anger. It can develop into resentment. And having done my hidden emotions, you know, I think it's about, you know, can my image of resentment and rage be beautiful? Because I look at those self-portraits and I think, ah, she's gorgeous, you know, and it's because it feels really good to get that out in a visual way. But I'm no longer willing to let things slide. As someone who, I say that and then I'll probably go out and let something slide. But, you know, as someone who was socialized as a woman in the South, I think that generally speaking, and I'm all about intersectionality, but from my perception and perspective, you know, I feel like we're taught to let things slide. You know, we're taught to dim our light and quiet our voice. I was always told, you're intense, you're too loud. Well, I'm about to get louder, you know, because as of, what was it? No, the wee hours that were technically the 6th of November, I felt angry. And I thought, okay, I'm ready to march. I'm ready to use my artwork to spotlight, to illuminate what I feel is right, to use my arts writing to spotlight other artists who, you know, that's my artivism. After I did the piece on artivism with Danny and the other artists, I thought, okay, this is how I can lend a voice to these different causes that I believe in, is I can help to spotlight those other creatives who are maybe doing things that I don't do visually in my paintings or installations or whatever. But that's how I can help put a microphone to their voice, you know. And I think that over the next 4 years, it's going to be increasingly more important to do that and to stand together. like said, in an intersectional way.
Yes, yes. Whew, yeah, takeaways, right? Everybody, we have a lot of takeaways, right? I'm going to quote Greg as well. Greg Bunbury said, the process is the souvenir. I'm sorry, the design is the souvenir of the process. And I was just like, that's what I'm talking about, Greg. That's what I'm talking about. It is the souvenir, because the process, right? We know, we say this, but let's say it again. The process is what's important. How you design, how you think about the design, how it's going to impact you and others, how it's going to impact the world, the earth, beyond your existence. For me, it reiterates the importance of the work that we do as artists or as people who practice empathy, right? This is a souvenir, right? And this souvenir is important because when someone looks at this souvenir, they're going to have some type of impact, something that's going to affect them, something that's going to affect them. And so when I put my intention into this design, into this process, they're going to feel it. For me, that was one of the takeaways that comes to mind.
I love all of these. I want to claim them as my takeaways too. Which actually, we can encourage our listeners to please tell us your takeaways too. Put them in the chat, or in the comments, I should say.
Yeah. Please do. That makes sense. Because we want to know. Well, yeah. Everyone, this has been a fantastic study group. I've been taking lots of notes.
We've been calling it the study group, but right? If anyone has a better suggestion for what we can call this roundtable discussion situation thingy, yeah, we're open to suggestions.
Yeah, you can put that in the comments as well. Please share. So, we're going to conclude this episode by first saying thank you to Michael and Amy. Thank you again. This is always wonderful to have conversations that really feel good and impact folks. And I know what you all have shared is going to impact the audience as well. So thank you very much. In our next episode, we will be discussing the current societal implications of artificial intelligence, aka AI. So, and we brought this up, right? It's been coming up. It's just, it is what it's been around for a long time. But right now, we're going to talk about these current societal implications. So tune in on Saturday, January 25th, 2025 at 1 p.m. ET for the first episode in our next collection. We'd also like to remind our listeners that this podcast is funded by the two of us lady artivists and your donations. So please help keep our podcast going by making a donation through our PayPal link in the show notes below. And so with that being said, we would all like to say peace to everyone.
Peace as you go into the new year.
Right. Peace to you, right? We all need it. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.